I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
Syria has been under sanction of one kind or another since 1979 as an effort to constrain the ability of a regime that was sponsoring terrorism, carrying out acts of terrorism of its own, carrying out acts of human rights abuses, and much more for many, many years. But there's now a new regime that is not the Assad regime on the one hand, but it's a regime that grew out of al-Qaeda. I'm Dr. Matthew Levitt, and I direct the Reinhard program on counterterrorism and intelligence at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where I'm the Fromer-Wexler Senior Fellow. Sitting where we are today, there are basically three levels of sanctions targeting Syria. The first is there are individuals who are sanctioned. The second is there are groups that are sanctioned. And the third is that there are sanctions that apply to the state of Syria. For the purposes of today's conversation about removing or suspending sanctions, we're primarily talking about those sanctions that are applied to the state of Syria. Fundamentally, sanctions are different types of economic pressures on a country, an organization, or a person. That can involve sanctions on banks, it can involve sanctions on investment, it can involve restrictions on exports. There are a variety of different ways to financially sanction a country. And in an effort to unwind these, we have to pull at each of these different threads of the executive orders created by the White House, by the sanctions put in place by legislation, not only Treasury sanctions against, say, banks, but also commerce actions that preclude certain types of exports. So we're talking about state sponsorship of terrorism, which precludes the United States from being able to support IMF or World Bank lending to Syria. We're talking about Caesar sanctions, which came into effect when a whistleblower, codenamed Caesar, gave testimony before the US Congress about the extreme level of human rights abuses going on in Syrian prisons in the context of the Syrian civil war. And we're talking about a whole host of other executive orders and sanctions that have been applied to Syria. And so this has a huge impact on the ability of countries, organizations, humanitarian organizations to go in and do business with Syria. In the context of the unwinding of Syria sanctions, to totally terminate Caesar would require an act of Congress, which passed the legislation in the first place. After the fall of the Assad regime, the US Treasury Department issued a general license, GL-24, which tried to give some sanctions relief to Syria, but it didn't go far enough. And it was temporary, and it really wasn't working. That's why in May of 2025, following on the president's orders, the Treasury issued an updated and much expanded General License 25. It provided also for official banking channels so that money going into Syria didn't have to go through money exchange houses or hawaladars, or didn't have to be, put on trucks and cash and trucked across the border. These are the types of things that have to happen to make sure that Syria can come out of the 5 decades of Assad dictatorial rule. But in order to shape the new government, not so that it become a Jeffersonian democracy, but so that it is respectful of all the different ethnic groups and religious groups that make up the patchwork of Syria, so that it is not a threat to its neighbors, the US needs to maintain some leverage, and the most effective leverage is going to be the threat that sanctions can be reinstated, if absolutely necessary, should the regime revert to extremism. On the flip side, the suspension of the sanctions has to be real. People have to feel that they can invest over the long term in this country. And to that end, the US participating with Qatar and Turkey in efforts to rebuild the energy infrastructure, to supporting Gulf states, writing off and paying international debt. These are all signs that the US is serious about this, even as it is maintaining leverage over this new administration in Syria. Without serious sanctions relief, the new Syrian government would not be able to conduct business, would not be able to draw in investment, would not be able to have humanitarian organizations come in and provide the significant relief that the people of Syria need. You know, the people in the capital in Damascus were getting an hour of electricity a day at one point. Then it went all the way up to 4 hours a day. That's just not tenable. But to rebuild an energy infrastructure, we're talking about massive investment. And if you give people a 6-month license or a 12-month license, that's just about enough time to move equipment in and not do a whole lot. So what Syria needed was a longer window and a greater sense of a commitment to sanctions, so long as the regime continues to commit to the steps that it has agreed to. These sanctions relief actions should remain in place. And so while it's important to remove the impediments to humanitarian support, to the ability to rebuild the country, to the ability to rebuild the electrical grid, we don't want the post-Assad experiment to fail. It's also important to maintain leverage, to make sure that this government continues along the path that it has started out on, keeping Iran out, stopping shipments of weapons to Hezbollah, acting when they are provided information on ISIS cells, dealing with foreign fighters within its ranks. We need to make sure that this government continues to do the things that it has committed itself to do. And because of the history of the president, the interim president of Syria, because of the history of the organization he leads, which is the backbone of this new government, it's important for there to be no trusting and verifying, just verifying.